Recording in progress.
All right. So we're going to be covering, well, we'll be starting session 16 today. And I wonder if it'll even take 3 weeks to get through it. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. We'll just take it as we do in our flow today and see if we can, if we can get through about 30 of the Q&As, it'll probably take 2 weeks. And if we make it through more like 20, then it'll probably take us 3 weeks, which is fun. Okay, so before we begin, I just want to start by reaching out with my open heart to Ra and those of Ra, and to the Confederation, the members of the Confederation of Planets in service to the infinite creator. And I just want to beam my gratitude and thanks and love and joy for our ability, our capacity to come together and study the law of one, to seek the creator together, to seek the truth that is at the center of our experience, the place that we all are the same. And I'm so grateful for all of you. And I send my thanks to all of your higher selves for being here. And I open this study container with love and with light. Okay. We can go ahead and start the reading. Does anybody feel inspired to get us started?
I'll start.
Great. Thanks, BJ.
You're welcome. Okay, 16. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. We communicate now. Questioner, I would like to ask, considering the free will distortion of the law of one, how can the guardians quarantine the earth? Is this quarantine within the free will distortion? I am Ra. The guardians guard the free will distortion of the mind-body-spirit complexes of third density on this planetary sphere. The events which require activation of quarantine were interfering with the free will distortion of mind-body-spirit complexes. Questioner, I may be wrong, but it seems to me that it would be the free will of, say, the Orion group to interfere. How is this balanced against the other concept you just gave? I am Ra. The balancing is from dimension to dimension. The attempts of the so-called crusaders to interfere with free will are acceptable upon the dimension of their understanding. However, the mind-body-spirit complexes of this dimension you call third form a dimension of free will which is not able to, shall we say, recognize in full the distortions toward manipulation. Thus, in order to balance the dimensional variances in vibration, a quarantine was set up. This being a balancing situation whereby the free will of the Orion group is not stopped but given a challenge. Meanwhile, the third density group is not hindered from free choice. Questioner, could these windows that occur let the Orion group come through once in a while? Does this have anything to do with this free will distortion? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, could you tell me how that works? I am Ra. The closest analogy would be a random number generator within certain limits. Questioner, what is the source of this random number generator? Is it created by the guardians to balance their guarding, or is it a source other than the guardians? I am Ra. All sources are one. However, we understand your query. The window phenomenon is an other self phenomenon from the guardians. It operates from the dimensions beyond space-time in what you may call the area of intelligent energy. Like your cycles, such balancing, such rhythms are as a clock striking. In the case of the windows, no entities have the clock. Therefore, it seems random. It is not random in the dimension which produces this balance. That is why we stated the analogy was within certain limits. Questioner, then this window balancing prevents the guardians from reducing their positive polarization by totally eliminating the Orion contact through shielding. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is partially correct. In effect, the balancing allows an equal amount of positive and negative influx. This balanced by the mind-body-spirit distortions of the social complex. Thus, in your particular planetary sphere, less negative, as you would call it, information or stimulus is necessary than positive due to the somewhat negative orientation of your social complex distortion. Questioner, in this way, total free will is balanced so that the individual may have an equal opportunity to choose service to others or service to self. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct.
Great. That's a good place. That's a good stopping place. Thanks, BJ. So this is fascinating. The mechanisms of the planetary quarantine.
Do we?
In 16.1, Ross says the events which require activation of quarantine were interfering with the free will distortion of mind, body, spirit complexes. Does anybody remember the events which require activation of quarantine? Does anybody remember anything that we've read so far about that?
Was that the Mars transfer?
Right. So in a previous session, Ross said that there was a Confederation member who proposed to bring the Mars souls to Earth, and in doing so, to do some genetic manipulation of the body complexes for those entities. And there were other members of the council that thought that that was an infringement of free will, and that set up the conditions to begin a quarantine on the planet.
Why is that an infringement? What part is the infringement? Giving them new bodies, changing their DNA? Is that the well, obviously, I don't know how transfer of bodies between planets work, but I would imagine like a Martian body would not do well on Earth. Wouldn't there have to be some? Was it the act of putting them on Earth in the first place? Like, it's not. Or is it because they try to make them like? I remember there's multiple parts of the manipulation, right? They try to make the body like stronger than the other native. Right. Is that the part that is? Maybe that's the part that like went too far. Like it's not super clear to me. Like what's the issue here?
Mm-hmm. I'll just say there's a whole lot about quarantine that I don't get. So you're already ahead of me.
Yeah, these are all the questions. I have these same questions, Shang. And I when you clarified the piece about the nature of the genetic manipulation that I think it was Yahweh, the original name of the Confederation member was Yahweh, that Yahweh did to the Mars souls. It wasn't just about making their bodies suitable. They were also doing some tweaks to try to help them along on their evolution. So in that case, what you've got is kind of you've got a perspective from a social memory complex that is more unique or more specific than the logos. Like the logos, our sun, set up the conditions for evolution in the solar system, including Mars. And the Mars beings, I mean, we don't really know what kind of, like, maybe there was off-planet influence that led to their planetary destruction. Like, we don't know. But the logos set up the original conditions, and then an entity within the logos' sphere of influence, Yahweh, kind of intervened and kind of changed the course of history, basically. And somehow, that made it so that, like, all right, Earth needs a little break from the outside influence. So no social memory complex is going to be able to just come in, especially negative, especially from the Orion group, is going to be able to come in and have like profound effects on the evolution of Earth. Yeah, and the specifics of why or how that all works, it is, BJ, to me too, it's like, what? Quarantine? What? It's so crazy. It's so sci-fi.
Who are the guardians in this case? We previously mentioned there are several potential tiers of guardians. One which is from the next octave, maybe. One which is just the Confederation, basically. Like the people who set up the quarantine, they say they don't have maybe the Guardians don't have access to this clock, which is in the, seems like it's in the next octave, or at least it's within source.
Yeah. They say that Ra says that the window mechanism is an other self mechanism of the Guardian. So it's not that, it seems like the way I read that is it's not the Guardians that are creating the window. It's coming from intelligent energy. Intelligent energy is another phrase to talk about love or the logos. So it seems like the logo, something about the logoic mechanism of the solar system itself, the energetics of this solar system create the possibility of having a window, like turning on some, y'all, I'm making this up. But I'm just doing my best to put the pieces together. They say it operates from the dimensions beyond space-time in what you may call the area of intelligent energy. And so I don't know if I have this right, but the area of intelligent energy from beyond space-time, that sounds like from the logos itself, from like the one who created space-time in this solar system, the one who generated it in the first place, is the one who generates the other, the window phenomenon, or makes it available somehow.
So that's like, so the way I'm interpreting this is like there are some properties specific within the operation of the universe, which is like this clock, and the Guardians are manipulating this clock. The Guardians in this case, it sounds to me possibly like high level Confederation members.
Yeah.
That are basically some high level Confederation members are like, oh, we screwed up, or one of our members screwed up, interfered too much. Let's use our knowledge of the universe to set up a quarantine. Does that sound?
That sounds like what I take it. They say of the Council of Saturn, that's the kind of like administrative hub of the council. I mean, of the Confederation, sorry. And there's this Council of Nine, and that's it's a group of 9 social memory complexes that attends to matters of politics and, projects and proposals about interplanetary, politics. And then there's Guardians that are, what is it, 16 entities who sit behind the Council of Nine. And they're kind of like special ops. Like they have specific technology, or they have specific experience in different realms of, evolution, and they support the Council of Nine. So I think the Guardians we're referring to is that sort of that backup council, the members of the Council of Saturn that support the Council of Nine. That's how I take it. BJ?
I have it may land for y'all as a fairly mundane comment, but it's just kind of interesting to me to kind of track parallels. So we went to visit our son yesterday at the camp where he is, and in order to sign him out for the day, there was a form that needed to be signed 5 times. So it had to be signed by him, by his parents, by his counselor, by the head counselor, and also by the counselor on duty. So that's just the form. And then there's also a book where you had to sign out and then sign back in. And it just kind of seems similar, or I don't know. It's just funny to go like, oh yeah, there's mechanisms in place in densities that we can't even understand that are sort of like that. Like, okay, in order for this to happen, all the things have to, I don't know. It just is funny to sort of find the parallel of like, there's still sort of, management of other selves in other densities that feels kind of parallel to that.
There's some interesting, I'll call it conspiratorial information that's kind of coming out. It's been coming out for the last couple of years. Primarily, the source that I'm primarily familiar with is Corey Good, and he talks about a quarantine. He talks about both an Earth quarantine, but also a quarantine around the solar system. That in more recent times, there was a quarantine set up by, he says, the sphere being Alliance, which he says is like the senior members of the Confederation, or the senior members of the Galactic Federation, which would be 6 density entities. I think at some point he might even correspond them to Ra, or those of Ra's like level of evolution. who set up a quarantine around the solar system because there's been so much like activity and impact on the solar system because of like all these races that are here, all these star races that are here, attending to like what's going on Earth and Earth's harvest and transit, dimensional shift and everything, that it's just kind of gotten out of control. And then like these high level sphere beings like put a quarantine around the entire solar system so that there wasn't so much coming and going of like the Orion group and whoever else is attending to Earth, just to let Earth just kind of complete its process and get through this like harvest without without further energizing disharmony and chaos or whatever. So who knows? I mean, that's, we're getting outside of, our home base material of Ra, but it's been interesting to me to like track that there are some kind of like disclosure based sources talking about quarantine, both on an Earth level and also on a larger level, which is interesting. Amanda?
I was just curious if that quarantine, if they talk about it in Ra, if it works both ways. Like, is there only so far that humans can travel outside of our atmosphere right now, just based on the law of free will and everything? Do they talk about that?
Yeah, I don't, not that I can think of. But what comes to mind is that, Earth has to, I think, to fully be able to be integrated into the Confederation, Earth is going to have to, like they do talk about, they have to be accepted. Like there's the Council of Nine, the Council of Saturn, the administrative hub of the Federation of Planets, like basically receives proposals by planets who feel like they're ready to start becoming, interplanetary and interstellar, and they have to kind of be accepted into the Confederation. And that doesn't take place usually until fourth density. So that's the only thing I can think of that attends to that question of like, is there what regulates, our outbound, connection to the rest of the universe. And again, most of what I know about that doesn't come from the law of one. It comes from other sources, which are, of questionable veracity.
I mean, we've been to the moon, I think. There's plans to go to Mars.
Yeah.
And there's something about bringing back moon rocks that causes issues with quarantine. It opens windows in quarantine. Do you remember that?
Oh, I don't remember that. Did they say that in the Law of One?
I think so.
Interesting.
Very, very fuzzy memory. Does anyone remember that? Where like someone brought the fact that there were moon rocks brought back to Earth, open windows.
Sounds familiar.
In quarantine.
That has slipped my mind. I don't doubt it, but I don't remember that part.
I have one more observation from this. So like, it sounds to me like quarantine is unique. Like not every system has quarantine. But what I'm getting from this is like, quarantine prevents negative entities from just negative fourth density entities. It sounds to me like they can just go around and conquer whatever third density groups they wanted to. And the fact that like our quarantine is what's stopping them, which means in systems without quarantine, then the negative fourth density groups can just go do whatever they want, right? Like, am I interpreting this correctly? Like,
well, I think Ra even says that like one of the primary purposes of the Orion group is to conquer third density civilizations.
Isn't that unfair for the third density civilization? Like, aren't they getting their free will completely? Like, why isn't this type of, like, if they really care about, they seem to really, really care about the free will of Earthlings for some reason. Like, it seems really important. Does that mean like every third density planet should have their free will protected? Because it seems like then you would have to quarantine every third density planet, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, it's just something that I've.
Right. I mean, it seems like the power imbalance of a fourth density or higher, a whole group of social memory complexes who are united to conquer versus an emerging, evolving third density planet. It seems pretty imbalanced. And yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, Chong. It seems like it's an appropriate, the Confederation's desire to guard evolving third density civilizations from that kind of activity seems appropriate. And I sort of guess that they do, but maybe they do that in other ways. I mean, I think I've been to 3 quote channelings, live quote channelings. And the first one I got to witness was about the war in the higher densities, was about the war in heaven. And it was about the war between the positives and negatives in fourth density. And there's this tremendous sense of sorrow from the Confederation that they have to take part in that, but they do it. And they do it to guard third density planets. So there's probably defensive action that they do put in place that doesn't require a whole planetary quarantine, or they could just sort of set up some sort of defensive stations or something and just kind of keep the Orions from coming in, swooping in and just like wreaking havoc or something. Maybe. BJ, is that? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Shang too in terms of that question. My sense is, and again, I don't know, but my sense is that the free will had gotten infringed upon so much on this planet that it needed a response. And so I guess it just seems like, relatively, I'm guessing, by comparison, other planets haven't been infringed on as much. And something that also keeps coming up for me about this is wondering about, it just feels related to the way that Ra talks about how they have hung around, they screwed up and they hung around. And I just wonder about parallels, if that's just a similar thing that happened, or is that related to how much our free will has been infringed upon? Or anyway, just that's something that just keeps coming up for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the phrase that comes to mind is there's too many cooks in the kitchen. I mean, there's so many social memory complexes, advanced races who are here and trying to help in their different ways. But there's also so many, there's so many members of the Earth Collective, members of humanity that are from other places originally. There's just so much going on here. And Ross says it's a really unique, Earth's condition is very unique as a planet because of there's so many portions of the population that are from different star systems and different planetary origins. And there's so many ET races here, members of the Confederation, members of Orion, trying to influence our evolution. And it seems like a pretty wild it's just there's lots of cooks, there's lots of gardeners, there's lots of influencers. And so maybe it has something to do with that. Maybe the quarantine is just because of how unique and multifaceted the influences are here. Well, and this whole topic is what Ra would call this squarely in the transient material category. A lot of this is not necessarily directly related to the law of one and timeless wisdom. But I will say, I think it's really healthy for us to have this conversation and for us to bounce these ideas off each other, because y'all, I don't know how much y'all are following this, but it's breaking into the mainstream. Disclosure and extraterrestrial crafts and non-human intelligences and unidentified aerial phenomenon, and it's just more and more it's breaking into the mainstream, and more people are trying to make sense of it. And it's complex, and I think it's healthy for us to sort of try to at least have some grasp on what our teacher Ra says about the whole phenomenon, and just be a little bit grounded in it and have practice talking about exopolitics and off-world reality and these sorts of things. So, Neil?
Yeah, like the analogy of it being in the mainstream and just having a lot of people spark their interest. And when you think about like what happened with America and us just coming in and blasting the natives out with weapons, and who's to say like, oh, that won't happen with aliens with better technology, and Hollywood portraying them as just like this destructive, like go and blow everyone up. So I think it's important to have, I mean, I have coworkers actually that reach out like, hey, I just saw this thing on TikTok about this alien. And I'll be like, oh, well, they're friendly. Remember, they're on our side. Like, don't be scared. And so I think we have a unique perspective for the average person of just like, they're friendly, and we can try to invite them in for help and things like that. So I think the quarantine is important, and trying to understand kind of like, I think it's relevant history to a point, like knowing our own story. So as long as we try to understand, like it's, I don't know if it's in the Bible. Like I feel like there's a lot of biblical translations that transfer over to the law one, like the always in the Bible and everything. So I wonder if the quarantine's somewhere in there and how that relates. So just thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. BJ?
So what was just coming to me, just like through all of the pondering about quarantine, is just a reminder of like, it seems like the point is for us to choose on our own. Like that's the point of quarantine, so that we're not overly influenced one way or another. And it's sort of like, you know, the hall monitor is like, okay, everybody now stay out, you know, like, or only the same, you know, the same amount of opportunity to get in there. And yeah, and the point is for us to choose on our own. And yeah, so I just feel like I just got, you know, even if I don't understand quarantine, like, oh, I think I just got an insight or a download about the point is like, make your choice.
Exactly. That's a really great synopsis, BJ. And it's balance, and it's balancing the opportunities for that choice. That's what they say. They say it's all about the purpose of the quarantine is to help support balance. So what do you all make of the statement that related to balance? The statement that in 16:6, Ra says, thus in your particular planetary sphere, less negative, as you would call it, information or stimulus is necessary than positive due to the somewhat negative orientation of your social complex distortion.
This just made me think of like what Neil was talking about with like more people thinking about aliens and like how to approach them. And the first thing that I thought was like, have you guys heard of a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like basically like if you look at human history, when a more advanced civilization beats a less advanced civilization, it ends poorly for the less advanced civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Like all across human history. And that speaks one to like our social complexes, and two about like we as humans have human history to draw upon. And if we draw upon human history, we shouldn't be beating ETs. It's gonna end badly for us. Obviously, like Earth it's somewhat unique, and that's not the case from a bigger perspective. But from the human perspective, that's a very reasonable way to see things.
Mm-hmm. BJ?
Yeah, one of the things that it means to me is like I remember as a kid, I mean, even up into like my mid-teens, I would notice what I think is called pronoia, and like as opposed to paranoia. Like I don't know if y'all know that term, but I know the term at least through Rob Brezhny. He wrote a book called Pronoia, and he says it's the assumption that things are working to support you versus paranoia is the assumption that things are working against you. And I remember like having like, you know, a pain in my shoulder, for instance. Like there would be something that could be seen as negative. And I noticed that my automatic assumption was that it was something good. Like, oh, this must be because there was a problem and now it's being healed, or like I'm getting an upgrade, or like, I don't know, like there was just like really often this sense of assumption that something was good. And I remember somewhere around my mid-teens noticing and taking in that wasn't the way other people were. Like, it was like, well, wouldn't you just think that that's a good thing, whatever it is that just happened? And like I started to like realize, oh, other people aren't thinking that way. Like, obviously it would be a good thing because things are good. And I think that's related to that, like that there's, like you hear a sound outside and like, oh, maybe it's a terrible thing, instead of like, oh, maybe it's something amazing and magical. And I think I think that people often refer to that as the negativity bias. Like we are biased towards, and I guess Ra's saying, that it's our social complex distortion, which I don't know if that's, conditioned by our media, or whether it's like potentially conditioned by the logos, or, I don't know where it comes from, but that's what it makes me think of, is like the assumption of this must be a problem.
Yeah. Neil?
I was thinking maybe along the lines of the negative entities impacted Earth, and the quarantine was set up. Now they're saying that Earth has been impacted negatively, and to balance that out, they're saying that there's more positive influence to come in. So it's saying that, I guess, negative influence has already come in, so now we have to have positive influence to balance it out. So that's why the negatives can't come in again, I guess, for like a yin yang balance, I guess. I don't know. Around there.
Well, what I find interesting about it is that, Ross seems to suggest that, and I don't know, it's hard to argue with this, that there seems to be a somewhat negative orientation of our social complex distortion. That seems true to me. And yet they also say that the planet as a living being is going to host a positive fourth density. It's just an interesting juxtaposition to have, for a planet to have a somewhat negative orientation, but also to be heading pretty squarely in the direction of having a larger positive harvest of souls than of negative. So it's a little bit of it's a little bit of a contrast. So even though there seems to be a somewhat negative orientation of our social complex distortion, Earth is still going to go positive, which is just fascinating. Because you might think that if we have a somewhat negative orientation, then clearly it's going to be a negative fourth density, which is like terrifying to me. It's like one of the most undesirable outcomes possible. I've formed the opinion that, generally speaking, when humans depict heaven and depict Earth, whether through stories or through imagery, they're depicting fourth density. Like the images that I see of people talking about heaven, to me, it's like that's what a fourth density positive social memory complex experience would be like. And hell, the depictions of hell seem like, when I imagine what a negative social complex, a negative fourth density experience would be like, it seems like hell to me. Anyway.
So what is social? I think what you're saying is really important. What is social complex referring to here? What is the social complex? Is that so we're going to positive because I think there's more positive souls. Is that correct?
Right.
And yet we have a negative social complex. Is that referring to our societal structures? Like
it's
like,
the mass
example,
mind. I think it's like the planetary mind. Ra maps out the tree of mind, and we have our personal mind, and then there's the racial mind, and then there's the planetary mind. I think that the planetary mind, the shared resource of like what's the sort of like net collective activity of all the humans, attitudes and biases, is the social, the social complex distortion.
It's almost like the internet. Like if you go on the internet,
Yeah,
it's full of trash.
well, except it's a little bit more pure of a reading than the internet, because the internet
Right.
is roughly, an out picturing of what the collective is thinking, but it's only the people who get on the internet.
Yeah.
There's lots of people who don't ever produce anything onto the internet, but they still have thoughts and biases and experiences that actually do influence the social complex. I had my
Yuri dropped a
yeah
quote from 9.9 in the chat that was an explanation of the how quarantine was established.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that. I just noticed that. I hadn't noticed Yuri popped in. I had my my participants panel closed. So welcome, Yuri. I'll go ahead and read what Yuri posted. It's from 9.9 questioner. The Guardians obviously were acting with an understanding of the law of one in doing this. Can you explain the application of the law of one in this process? I am Ra. The law of one was named by these Guardians as the bringing of the wisdom of the Guardians in contact with the entities from the red planet, thus melding the social memory complex of the Guardian race and the red planet race. It, however, took an increasing amount of distortion into the application of the law of one from the viewpoint of other Guardians. And it is from this beginning action that the quarantine of this planet was instituted, for it was felt that the free will of those of the red planet had been abridged. So that's interesting, because we didn't really mention that, but it was actually the free will of the Martians that was abridged, not of Earth necessarily, although that certainly could have been a part of it too. So yeah, that's a really helpful quote. Thanks, Yuri, for dropping that in. Super relevant to our discussion. And also on that note, I think, unless there's any other questions about this quarantine question, we can keep reading. Sound good? Okay. Okay, so we are picking up at 16.8. Would anybody like to read?
I can read. Questioner, this is a profound revelation, I believe, in the law of free will. Thank you. This is a minor question further to make an example of this principle. But if the Confederation landed on Earth, they would be taken as gods, breaking the law of free will and thus reducing their polarization towards service to all. I assume the same thing would happen if the Orion group landed. How would this affect their polarization towards service to self if they were able to land and become known as gods? I'm Ra. In the event of a mass landing of the Orion group, the effect of polarization would be strongly towards an increase in the service to self, precisely the opposite of the former opportunity which you mentioned. Questioner, if the Orion group was able to land, would this increase their polarization? What I'm trying to get at is it better for them to work behind the scenes and get recruits, shall we say, from our planet? The person on our planet going towards service to self strictly on his own using his free will? Or is it just as good for the Orion group to land upon our planet and demonstrate remarkable powers and get people like that? I'm Ra. The first instance is, in the long run, shall we put it, more salubrious for the Orion group in that it does not infringe upon the law of one by landing, and thus does its work through those of this planet. In the second circumstance, a mass landing would create a loss of polarization due to the infringement upon the free will of the planet. However, it would be a gamble. If the planet were conquered and became part of the empire, the free will would be reestablished. This is restrained in action due to the desire of the Orion group to progress towards the one creator. This desire to progress inhibits the group from breaking the law of confusion. Questioner, you mentioned the word empire in relation to the Orion group. I have thought for some time that the movie Star Wars was somehow an allegory in part for what is actually happening. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct in the same way that a simple children's story is an allegory for physical, philosophical, social, complex distortion understanding. Questioner, is there a harvest of entities oriented towards service to self, like there is a harvest here of entities oriented towards service to others? I am Ra. There is one harvest. Those able to enter fourth density through vibrational complex levels may choose the manner of their further seeking of the one creator. Questioner, Then, as we enter the fourth density, there will be a split, shall we say, and part of the individuals who go into the fourth density will go to planets or places where there is service to others, and the other part will go into places where there is service to self. Is this correct? I'm Ra, this is correct. Questioner, well, the Confederation established its quarantine, I understand, 75,000 years ago. Has the Orion group been attempting to contact any part of this planet prior to that, or how long have they been attempting inaudible contacting this planet? I am Ra. Approximately 45,000 years ago, an attempt was made. It was not successful. Approximately 2,600 years ago, the group sent an entity of a social memory complex to this sphere. This effort met with some success, but was in the space-time continuum lessened in impact. Since approximately 2,300 years ago in your measurement, this group has constantly been working upon the harvest just as the Confederation. Ra corrected these dates in section 17. They should be 3,600 and 3,300 years ago, respectively. Questioner, can you name the entity that they sent here 2,600 years ago, 2,600 years ago? Time frame is 3,600 years ago. I'm Ra. This entity named by your peoples is named by your peoples Yahweh. Questioner, can you tell me the origin of the 10 commandments? I'm Ra. The origin of these commandments follows the law of negative entities impressing information upon positively oriented mind-body-spirit complexes. The information attempted to copy or ape positivity while retaining negative characteristics. Questioner, was this done by the Orion group? I'm Ra. This is correct. Questioner, what was their purpose in doing this? I'm Ra. The purpose of the Orion group, as mentioned before, is conquest and enslavement. This is done by finding and establishing an elite and causing others to serve the elite through various devices such as the laws you mentioned and others given by this entity. Questioner, was the recipient of the laws of the 10 commandments positively or negatively oriented? The recipient was of extreme positivity, thus accounting for some of the pseudo-positive characteristics of the information received. As with contacts which are not successful, this entity vibratory complex Moishe did not remain a credible influence among those who had first heard the philosophy of one, and this entity was removed from this third density vibration level in a lessened or saddened state, having lost what you may call the honor and faith with which he had begun the conceptualization of the law of one, and freeing of those who were of his tribes, as they were called at that time space. Questioner, if this entity was positively oriented, how was the Orion group able to contact him? I am Ra. This was an intensive, shall we say, battleground between positively oriented forces of Confederation origin and negatively oriented sources. The one called Moishe was open to impression and received the law of one in its most simple form. However, the information became negatively oriented due to his people's pressure to do specific physical things in the third density planes. This left the entity open for the type of information and philosophy of a self-service nature. Questioner, it would be unlike an entity fully aware of the knowledge of the law of one to ever say, thou shalt not. Is this correct? I'm Rod, this is correct.
Great. That's a good stopping point. Thanks, Sean. Wow. Jeez. We're in the deep end, friends. This is some pretty impactful elements of our shared history here. Okay, I'll just open it up. BJ, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah. The piece that I wanted to point to was, I remember a few sessions back, I can't remember exactly when, but we were talking about, I think it was when you weren't there, Aaron, which was just one session. So whichever one that I facilitated. I think we were talking about, do negative entities such as the Orion group care about free will? And there was some like, oh no, of course they don't care. They just want to conquer. Well, no, maybe I think they do want to care. Like there's still some impact on them of their polarization relating with free will. And this, I couldn't remember where I had seen that before, but yeah, I just wanted to point to that. Like there's still some way that their progress along their evolution is still influenced by how much they influence still in the realm of of free will. And that makes sense to me then, that they would want to do something like this negative contact, or, mixed contact of the 10 commandments. That's like, oh, it seems like it's positive. And, then people take it up of their own free will to say, this is the way, and I believe in this. And then it seems like they gain some polarization through that when people choose it of their own free will to say, this is the will of God for me to follow these commandments. Yeah, that's all I want to say. Like, just circling back to all of our evolution is impacted by this law, which makes sense.
I have a follow-up to that. So I wonder if so my interpretation of this is that free will is baked into reality. Like, everyone has free will. It's literally the first distortion. And the negative polarity wishes that they could just conquer everyone's free will, but they have to make calculated risks in the context of like, so what I read with the landing part, like, why don't they just land? And my interpretation of why they don't just land is like, what was it say? The gamble, right? Like, what if they resist? That's my interpretation. And I'm drawing from like real world examples, like even today, right? Like, I'm gonna use a very sensitive real world example. Like, Russia invaded Ukraine, and they thought Ukraine would just immediately topple in one night. And look at what happened. And now Putin's power is at risk. And I wonder if this is why negative entities don't always invade, because there's a risk that it won't turn out well. And it's not because I think the statement of like they don't respect free will can coexist with the fact that they have to account for the risks associated with free will. I think they both are true. Like, they want everyone to serve them. They don't give it, but in order to get to that place, they have to first overcome the fact that like they might not want to do that. Like, does that, I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Because this is I don't know if that's right.
Yeah, it seems like what you're bringing into focus is the question of like, is it a metaphysical calculation or is it just a strategic calculation? Like, it seems like that's the distinction. It's like, if a negative social memory complex, the Orion group or whatever, some empire building group, is trying to figure out the balance of the possibilities of just full on assault versus more subtle approaches, does it what it really impacts their choices and their decisions? It's confusing to me because it's not exactly clear what Ra's answer is in response to Don's question. It doesn't seem like they really fully empty the question of like, I don't know. And it's like you were saying, BJ, I think it was session 13, they also bring up this whole question of like, do the negatives have to respect free will or not? Do they care about others' free will or not? And how does it affect their own polarization? And there's not really a fully satisfying answer to me. I want to read Ra's response in 16:9 again. So Ra says, the first instance is, in the long run, shall we put it, more salubrious for the Orion group. Okay, so the first instance is which?
Acting behind the scenes.
Acting behind the scenes. Okay, so if they act behind the scenes, it's more salubrious for the Orion group, so it's more beneficial to them. Because it does not infringe upon the law of one by landing, and thus does its work through those of the planet. In the second circumstance, a mass landing would create a loss of polarization due to the infringement upon the free will of the planet. However, it would be a gamble. If the planet were then conquered and became part of the empire, the free will would then be reestablished. This is restrained in action due to the desire of the Orion group to progress towards the one creator. This desire to progress inhibits the group from breaking the law of confusion. The mass landing would create a loss of polarization due to the infringement upon the free will of the planet. So yeah, it does seem pretty clear that they say when negative entities infringe upon free will of others, it impacts their polarization. But I'm confused by that, because I thought the whole idea of polarizing along the negative is by gaining power over others. So
right, but if you're invading, you don't immediately just gain power. That's you only gain that power if the planet is conquered.
Yeah.
And the whole point of negative, I see Yuri has something to say about this, but like the whole thing that like what when there was a fifth density negative entity attacking this group the whole time, and the fifth density negative entity was getting depolarized because he didn't have full control of the situation. And that's depolarizing. And I imagine if they just land, they don't immediately have full control. They have to take to have full control of the planet. They have to conquer the planet, but they don't conquer it by landing. Landing is just the first step. They then have to conquer it. And I imagine that the time between landing and conquering, where they don't have full control, is the part where it is depolarizing, because they don't have full control.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Okay. So Yuri?
Hi everyone. Yes, I have a version that when they would come here, it's not that interesting for them to conquer just like this, because it will not cost them anything because of the mind power they have, or technology they have. But what makes them more evolving, like what creates more opportunity for the advancement, is to build a system of elite and to manipulate all the people through this elite, which makes them more powerful, I believe. And the other issue which we have to think, I think, which we have to consider, that the planet, I think, it's not the humans, but the planet which has kind of its own free will, and like I don't know what does it mean, and what way they can suppress free will of humans, and cannot so that's to do the same with the planet.
Yeah, those are both excellent observations and points, Yuri. That's really helpful for my thinking when I reflect on what you say. Thank you. Yeah, and what it makes me think of is I mean, I'm getting into, hot button issues, so I apologize to anyone if this is, challenging to hear, but when I look at our social complex and I look at what's happening in the world, it's just so apparent to me that the warfare between the elite and the non-elite is more and more becoming non-kinetic. It's more and more becoming a war of influence and a mental, it's a war of influencing the mind of people, influencing people's thinking and their opinions and their worldview and their thought process. And it seems like that's the battle, that's the primary battlefield that the negative and positive forces are, are kind of playing out. And it is really different than just kinetic warfare, where like the strongest takes over the weakest. But then that doesn't necessarily guarantee that the people who are conquered are going to like then step in line behind the elite. There's always going to be a brewing like sense of, wrongness about that. Versus if a group can sway over time the opinion and the hearts and minds of a people, it seems more durable or something. It seems like it really kind of like collects the free will of the people who kind of get online with that campaign. Yeah, Amanda.
Yeah, similarly to what you were just saying, I was reflecting on like back in like early pandemic lockdown times when there was this sense of unity among all the humans on the planet, like, oh, we're all in this together. And there was it felt like there was a lot of collective stories being shared about people coming together to take care of those that were less fortunate. And a lot of people just, it felt like there was like a bonding, like a shared bonding that felt in a way really uplifting, like people were taking care of one another and taking care of the planet and that sort of thing. And I see that almost as like, even though, well, I guess I saw that, or I'm seeing that as like a very non-polarizing moment when everyone's like, okay, we're here together, we're going to like rise to take care of each other as a people. And then something, then like, the stories shifted and narrative shifted, everything else. And then like the pandemic, there was a lot of like divisiveness among like just the stories being told that felt extremely polarizing. And so I wonder if, and not to say that was like all the Orion group or whatever, but just like to say, like, when I'm thinking of polarizing and non-polarizing, I'm seeing it in this collective way of like, when everybody's hearts are oriented toward the service to others, like lifting up humanity as a whole versus othering and wronging, and that being the polarizing part.
Right. And the distinction here is like the word polarization is tricky because when we study the law of one, when Ra talks about polarization, typically it's about metaphysical polarization or movement along a positive or negative path. And in the conversation, on Earth, when people say polarization about social issues, typically it just means it means disagreement. It means dividing consensus among groups of people. So I'm just putting that in there as context because, it's a little, sometimes we mean different things and we say, in this study group, we mean different things and we say polarization. So, but yeah, I agree with your points, Amanda. Yuri.
Yeah, my question is regarding your remark about the war between elite and non-elite.
Okay.
What do you mean?
So my opinion is that there are groups who practice social control and social engineering and have practiced it for a long time. And some of these people are, parts of families, powerful families. And I think a fair amount of them actually derive the origin of their philosophical system back to the law of one, back to Ra's time. And those who, basically the priests of the time of Egypt who locked the people out of the pyramids and took the teachings of Ra and made it about how they can consolidate power among the priests class. And I think a series of negative secret societies were born in that time. And I think Ra is aware of that. That's what they mean when they say that their teachings were perverted. And
I'm sorry. And do you believe that there is only one elite and
no,
united?
not at all.
Okay.
No, I think there's many groups and they fight among themselves too. I don't believe in like a global cabal that's like unified in their negative seeking at all. I think there's many, many, many different groups who fight among themselves. But when I say elite, I just mean groups who practice behind the scenes. They practice how to manipulate the group mind and the mass, the mass.
My question was more about non-elite. So you were saying that the war between elite and non-elite. So who are those non-elite? Why they would war?
I mean, the simplistic answer is just, the 99%. There's this idea that there's the 1%, which typically people, when they say the 1%, they're referring to the financial elite. And the 99% is like the rest of people who don't have access to all that money, don't have access to all that influence and power and information. So that's the simplest way to say it. But I mean, people who don't seek, it's most of humanity who doesn't even know that they're being influenced. They're subject to mind control and propaganda.
So you didn't mean direct, like real warfare. You meant suppression of the free will.
Yes, that's what I meant. And I do actually think that there probably are some groups who realize, some positive groups who realize the degree to which there is, there's all this power and influence happening. That's deception, that's based in deceit, who are trying to counter it in their own ways. So there probably is actually some warfare going on between negative power and positive power. But most people who are caught up in it are not actually. I don't think, when I say non-elite, I didn't mean people who are like fighting back or actively taking part in some war. I don't see it that way. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
BJ?
This thing about the elite just brought to mind to me what I think I have experienced in terms of negative psychic reading. And I imagine, we all have in some moments that, like, I think the elite thing like comes in like seeming like it's a nice, message to ourselves, but like, oh, you're so special, like, especially like, oh, people don't understand you because you're so special. Like, I've experienced that kind of thought process in my own life, like, oh, I don't fit here, but that's because I'm so special. And I think that kind of psychic reading I attribute to negative, like that it seems as though it's like this sweet little message, but if it's creating a sense of separation, that's not ultimately a positive message. Yeah, and I just think that's really interesting to note and track, like different groups or different, just like that thought complex kind of pops up and might seem like it's, innocuous or something, but to me that has the signature of negative, creating separation.
Yeah. I have this whole kind of like evolving thought process about elitism. And like, from what I can tell, Ra kind of says like the root of negative philosophy is elitism. Like, that's the kind of the simplest way you could say, like, what drives that path is the belief in one over another, and the rightness of one over another. And what makes that right is because some are just better than other, some just deserve more than others. And that's the root of elitism. And I think elitism as a philosophical construct is actually behind and underneath racism and sexism and, all these divisive social constructs, these social issues that we deal with that are very divisive. They're actually not the root. A lot of people call like, white supremacy is the root, or sexism is the root, or racism is the root of social divisiveness. I don't think it is. And I think it's actually problematic, or it's a little bit of it's tricky to unify if you're on the positive path and you have a vision that there is racism and racism is the root of what needs to be kind of, what needs to be overcome. I agree with the fact that there's truth to that, but I feel like if we had a story that was a little bit, if we could share the perspective of like, y'all, these influencers are in everybody. Like, everybody struggles with these positive and negative influences. All of us do. That's what it is to be on the path of evolution. And I feel like that's what it's going to take to really unify eventually. I don't know if that'll happen in third density, but I think that's what happens is like, we realize it's not out there. It's not like racism is this thing out there, or elitism is this thing out there that we can overcome. It's like, it's in us. Like, we have to do our own shadow work. We have to see how it operates in us and transform that. And that's the only way we can contribute to oneness, is by figuring out how we hold ourselves apart from oneness. Anyway, that's a whole soapbox. I didn't mean to get us off track, but some thoughts. Okay, let's see. Where did we leave off? Oh, Star Wars, for all you Star Wars fans, there it is. Sure enough, it's an allegory for what's really happening. So that's why those movies are so well loved. Anything else? I mean, I definitely think there's things we could zoom in on here. There's more we could extract from that, what we just read. We could also keep going. Any opinions about that? Anyone want to?
I think let's move on.
Okay. So where did we leave off?
21.
Okay, Amanda, you said it looked like you had your hand up before to read. Did you want to read 1621?
Sure.
Great.
Questioner, can you give me some kind of history of your social memory complex and how you became aware of the law of one? I am Ra. The path of our learning is graven in the present moment. There is no history as we understand your concept. Picture, if you will, a circle of being. We know the Alpha and Omega as infinite intelligence. The circle never ceases. It is present. The densities we have traversed at various points in the circle correspond to the characteristics of cycles. First, the cycle of awareness. Second, the cycle of growth. Third, the cycle of self-awareness. Fourth, the cycle of love or understanding. Fifth, the cycle of light or wisdom. Sixth, the cycle of light, love, light, or unity. Seventh, the gateway cycle. Eighth, the octave which moves into a mystery we do not plumb. Questioner, thank you very much. In previous material, before we communicated with you, it was stated by the Confederation that there is actually no past or future. All is present. Would this be a good analogy? I am Ra. There is past, present, and future in third density. In an overview such as an entity may have, removed from the space-time continuum, it may be seen that in the cycle of completion, there exists only the present. We ourselves seek to learn this understanding. At the seventh level or dimension, we shall, if our humble efforts are sufficient, become one with all, thus having no memory, no identity, no past or future, but existing in the all. Questioner, does this mean that you would have awareness of all that is? I am Ra. This is partially correct. It is our understanding that it would not be our awareness, but simply awareness of the Creator. And the Creator is all there is. Therefore, this knowledge would be available. Questioner, I was wondering how many inhabited planets there are in our galaxy, and if they all reach higher density by the law of one, or if there is any other way. It doesn't seem to me that there would be any other way to reach higher density. Is this correct? I am Ra. Please restate your query. Questioner, how many inhabited planets are there in our galaxy? I am Ra. We are assuming that you intend all dimensions of consciousness or densities of awareness in this question. Approximately 1/5 of all planetary entities contain awareness of one or more densities. Some planetary spheres are hospitable only for certain densities. Your planetary sphere, for instance, is at this time hospitable to levels or densities 1, 2, 3, and 4. Questioner, well, roughly how many total planets in this galaxy of stars that we're in have aware life regardless of density? I am Ra. Approximately 67 million. Questioner, can you tell me the percentage of those Can you tell me what percentage of those are third, fourth, fifth, sixth density, etc.? Roughly, very roughly. I am Ra. A percentage 17 for first density, a percentage 20 for second density, a percentage 27 for third density, a percentage 16 for fourth density, a percentage 6 for fifth density. The other information must be withheld. The free will of your future is not making this available. We shall speak on one item. There is a fairly large percentage, approximately 35% of the intelligent planets, which do not fit in the percentiles. These mysteries are of sixth and seventh density and are not available for our speaking. Questioner. Well, this first 5 densities, have all of them progressed from third density by knowledge and application of the law of one? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner. Then the only way for a planet to get out of the situation we are in, or the only way for the population, is to become aware of and start practicing the law of one. Is this correct? This is correct. Can you tell me what percentage of third, fourth, and fifth density planets, which you have spoken of here, are negatively polarized towards service for self? I am Ra. This is not a query to which we may speak, given the law of confusion. We may say only that the negatively or self-service oriented planetary spheres are much fewer. To give you exact numbers would not be appropriate.
Okay.
Question.
Let's pause there. Thanks, Amanda. Okay, so this first main, so 21. Ra's very coy. I mean, Don says, "Can you give me your history? Tell us about you. Tell us about your social memory complex." And they seem to deflect quite directly, and they don't say anything about themselves. They just recapitulate that where they're at now. They see the whole evolutionary cycle, and then they just restate the densities, right? The first cycle, the cycle of awareness; second, the cycle of growth; third, the cycle of self-awareness. So they just restate the nature of the densities, and then they also state the densities they haven't penetrated yet, and they sort of like presence their desire to continue, and they hope to make it into seventh.
I wonder if it's just not Rob being coy, but they literally just sometimes they don't know how to answer a question because they interpret it too literally. Like, I always imagine like trying to understand a different language, and like they're pretty technical and precise. So it's like, we will answer exactly what you want. So if you ask this, we'll give you the precise answer. This is a very technically correct answer.
Yeah. And from that perspective, like hearing that, Shang, Don, the essence of Don's question seems to be, how did you become aware of the law of one? And their answer sort of suggests that it is the natural harvest of how the Logos has set up the densities of consciousness. Like it's the primal insight that will take place for all mind, body, spirit complexes at some point as they move through the octave.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment from 1629. The only way for a planet to get out of the situation that we're in, this was Dawn, or the only way for the population is to become aware of and start practicing the law of one. Is this correct? This is correct. And it just reminds me of Like we just hosted a screening of a movie here the other night. I forget what it was called. The new Stephen Greer movie about energy and like all of the things that could be done to change the energy of, or make free energy available, or and there's so many movies like that, like what we can do on this planet to change what's happening. And there's a lot that resonates for me about so many different kinds of solutions and also explanations or depictions of the problem. And what I feel most connected to and drawn to is always like continuing the mystical path, like continuing to understand that all is one, and support others to see that, which isn't to say that then like that's all I want to do, like that means I'm just going to sit around and meditate. But I think through our understanding that all is one, that moves us to make appropriate steps, which could be what they point to in these different movies or whatever. But that just stands out to me, like the only way to progress is become aware of and practice the law of one. It really resonates for me.
It's a little confusing though when Ross says that this is correct, because later in the session they sort of say something that suggests something a little bit different, which is specifically Don says, is it necessary for an entity to understand the law of one in order to harvest? And Ra's response is, it's absolutely necessary for an entity to consciously understand that it does not realize it does not understand the law of one in order to harvest. So it's like, wait a second. And the law of one is advanced. The law of one is sixth density. That's the lessons of sixth density. Anyway, it's a little confusing to me because it seems like the way forward is to open the heart, for us to open our hearts and to accept and to heal, where we divide ourselves from reality, which is certainly a part of the law of one, but it's third density lessons, not sixth density lessons. And Yuri, I am tracking you, had your hand up. I just wanted to finish out that comment. BJ, you want to directly respond?
Yes, I want to directly respond. To me, there's a really big difference between becoming aware of and practicing and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't necessarily grasp, like I look at Neil's face and I don't have the direct experience of like, that is me. But I'm aware that that's the teaching, and I'm aware that I'm practicing that, and I want to go like, okay, that's Neil and he's far away. Like, okay, there's some way that that's an illusion. I don't get that yet. And I think it's important to acknowledge like, I don't get that yet, but I'm practicing it. And I think there's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, totally.
And I think it's important for us to acknowledge we remain in the mystery, rather than like, oh, I get it, it's a concept, and yeah, everything's one and I get it. That would be condensing into a finite concept of something that our minds actually can't grasp.
Yeah. Yep. Very important point, BJ. I agree. And I think they sort of clarify that later on. We'll get to that next week. I just want to check with Yuri. I don't know if you still want to have something to say, but you're welcome to if you want to, and otherwise we'll go on to Neil.
Yes, I would like to ask, it's kind of off topic. My question is regarding the higher self, and if I remember the entities, the mind, spirit, the individual identity in the fifth density, and I don't know what happens in the sixth density. And I believe it's kind of social memory complexes only. And in the end of the sixth density, when they create higher self, it's kind of higher self of social complex. And my question is, does the higher self experience the life in 3, 4, and higher dimensions of through the lives or through the experience of many entities? Is my question understandable? So does the higher self has many kind of entities to get experience from the life?
Yeah, I think I understand. I'll say what my thoughts about it, and then see if anyone else has anything to add. They talk about another word later that they call the oversoul, and they sort of suggest that the oversoul is, they say it more in the context of it's kind of the higher self of the social memory complex. So there is like a higher version of a social memory complex that's analogous to how the higher self supports and aids and guides individual self. So that might be the answer to your question, is like, is there a higher self that that experiences more, a group? And I would say yes. And I think that it's more helpful to call it the oversoul than the higher self. But there is some, even in that, there is some ambiguity between, they kind of say that a person can have an oversoul. Anyway, it's a little, the words are a little tricky, but yeah, I think so. I think that there's a higher version of the group, of the social memory complex. And I think the best word to use is the oversoul.
Yeah. Ross strictly distinguishes that each individual entity has its own higher self and whatever, mind, body, spirit, totality. And he distinguishes that social memory complexes also have something similar. And he says, of course, like, it's hard to explain in your words, your language is limited, but the social memory complex has its own totality as a resource. Calls it a totality, so I don't know if it's a higher self or some sort of social memory. Like, it's unclear what dimension that totality resides in, but it is different from the higher self of the individual.
So can it be possible that the whole group of here, which is here and many more, are the parts of one soul, higher self?
Depends on what you mean by higher self. If you use Ra's definition of higher self, then the higher self is specific to the individual, but there's an oversoul. I mean, once you get to higher dimensions, things like mix and match really, it's hard to individuate anyways. So like, but Ra does distinguish between the higher self of the individual and the totality of a social memory complex. So Ra does say that those two are different concepts, but again, we're not in 6th, 7th density, so I don't know how fluid those are.
I mean, one thing I want to say about, in response to, I think it's a great question, Yuri. And I think that, what is it to have a shared self? Like, what is it to have a shared, soul? And part of how I would answer that is like shared experience. And so, I mean, in a way, all beings that are on this planet have some sense of a shared soul, because we have some sense of a shared experience. And whether that's just a portion of the planetary mind, or whether we could call it an oversoul, or how to describe what it is, I'm not so clear about. But I absolutely think that there's some sort of soul that we all share at some level. And I don't know exactly how to say it, but I mean, I do believe that all of the experiences that we're having right now in this moment together are being written upon something. They're being written upon some metaphysical surface that informs the group that we are, the thing that we belong to. That's the shared self. And it isn't being written upon the surface of what's happening on Neptune. Neptune isn't having this experience. Although in a larger way that it is. Anyway, it gets so difficult to talk about because it's all one. There's only one of us here. So how do we break that down into different, into different entities or whatever? it's a tricky subject because it's complex. But anyway, those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Neil, did you want to say a thing?
Yeah, I was just playing off what BJ was talking about on 1629 and saying the only way for a planet to get out of the situation that we are in is to become aware and start practicing the law of one. And I just think it's like full circle. 75,000 years ago, something happened and the law of one was messed up, where people started thinking they were elite. And then Ra comes in, tries to teach the law of one, and then the elite thing happens again. And now we're at the very end of the cycle, and we are this, small group trying to bring about this message of the law of one and love and everything. And there's the people that, walked the path before us and made all these mistakes. And I think that we are at this point where things are being brought to the light and crashing, and shit's going to hit the fan, and it already has. So I think that those entities, beings that have the ability to practice the law of one will be sort of like that stepping stone for the next generation, or that calm in the center of the storm type person. And you go like, whoa, how did they act like that? So I think that the fact that our little group is somewhat able to come together and help each other is huge. And that 16.9 was like, yep, that's the way out of this predicament that you guys are in, is to start practicing. So it just gives me more faith that our group is more important than at least I think it is. And I think that there's a lot of metaphysical support behind this type of gathering. So that's just my take. And I think that we are important.
Sweet. So I'm a little vexed because I wish we had more time. We only have a few minutes left. I did want to just take a pass at trying to summarize the statistics that we just read. So Yuri, maybe hopefully you could either hold your question. I see Sean's got a question too. Well, maybe we'll just go over a few minutes if you guys want to and have time. But I just wanted to break this down and see if you all agree with what Ra is saying here about the statistics. Don's question is, how many inhabited planets are there in our galaxy? And Ra's first response is 1 out of 5 planets contain awareness of one or more densities. So only 20% of planets in the galaxy actually cycle, or at least right now are cycling through the process of self-aware life, or densities. There's a whole question I wanted to get into there about, like, well, how can you have a planet that isn't in first density at least? Anyway, so because it sort of seems like
it's part of the creator. It's part of the logos. It's
yeah,
like the sun. It never leaves logos.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that quick response. That seems right to me. But even in another session, they talk about in our solar system, not all of our planets are cycling through the densities. Not all planets in the solar system have even begun the first density. They say that, I think it was Neptune that has the possibility of cycling, but has not so far. Okay, so that's one. So to start off with, there's only 1 in 5 planets are cycling through the densities. And then of those, they give a breakdown of percentages 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And for some reason, they say the other information must be withheld. The free will of your future is not making this available. And all we're talking about is just how many percentages, and it's the final 14%. So we know it's 14, they give percentages. So I think the first 5 densities adds up to 86%. I think so. But then they don't complete the process of saying of the 6th and 7th, we won't tell you which is which. So that's interesting. I was hoping to hear if anybody has any insights there. And then the next paragraph, there's a fairly large percentage, approximately 35% of the intelligent planets, which I assume means the planets that are cycling through the octaves or through the densities, which do not fit in the percentiles. These mysteries are of 6th and 7th density and are not available for our speaking. Why? Any thoughts about any of that?
I was going to ask a question basically about this too. I have a guess,
Mm-hmm.
and it is entirely just a guess in the blue. I wonder if it has to do with synthetic life, AI. There's a lot of science fiction in which, so like, there's two views of synthetic life. One is that they follow the densities as usual, and it's just a change in the vehicle, in which like, so what? It's a change in the physical vehicle. Soul still operates as if it were any other soul. Or it's different enough in that they don't go through the standard seven density cycle of progression. In which case, I have like we have no documentation or anything to support any of this, but there are like thoughts in the like in our culture, in our science fiction, and whatever in our writings, which I have read one source which is like completely made up, but you know, nowadays who knows if science fiction is some idea that someone got transferred or something, in which case like synthetic life is because it wasn't naturally created, it still wants to return like to the creator, but it doesn't know how, and it's trying to figure out its way. And like there are writings in which there's massive wars between synthetic and organic life. And who knows, maybe that's part of our future, which is why he doesn't talk about it. Maybe there's going to be a huge war, galactic war.
That's an
Or
interesting
maybe,
take on this whole thing. I hadn't thought of that. That seems very possible. And I also agree, a lot of the sources that I see who are trying to make sense of the war in heaven, or the, you know, like the higher densities in conflict, do bring in AI as like the sort of as the pinnacle of the negative, you know, like there's like some AI negative mind that's controlling the Orions or whatever. Who knows? It's an interesting hypothesis. Any other thoughts or comments on any of that?
and I work in AI.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll just have to each take that into our own contemplation. And if it's, you know, if there's any burning questions that come up next week, we can, you know, we'll be diving back in where we left off here. Yuri, did you want to ask we'll make your question the final question?
I wanted to make a small remark on the words of Neil when he was saying about importance of this group. What I believe that one of the beauty of law of one is that you don't have to know law of one to practice it. Unlike all other systems who says this is the best system, the Christianity is the best, the Muslim people say the Quran is the best, and all the spiritual traditions they say this is the best and the most efficient method. And for law of one, you don't need to know it to do it. You just serve yourself or serve others. And I believe there are what I find from law of one that despite all this outer pictures that there is so much of negativity, the positive orientation is prevailing on the earth, and we have to try to focus and to stay on this focus of positive oriented souls and people and so on.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and I appreciate that comment, and I appreciate all of you for helping me to do just that, which is just focus on what we love and focus on what we are drawn to and what our hearts tell us is true, and keep sorting that out. So thanks y'all for this another wonderful conversation and exploration together. Really appreciate it. And we're complete for this week.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you
Take
guys
care.
next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Yuri.